Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting Camp Cretaceous video by me, Jeremy James Prutchick. Just this past Friday, the third season of Camp Cretaceous premiered on Netflix, and after watching it, I am astonished. I loved it. I already thought the other seasons were good, but this one is, in my opinion, the best one yet. There's so much I want to say, and that's what today's video is going to be all about. I'm going to do an in-depth review of Season 3 of Camp Cretaceous. Now, just before I get started, there are a few things you should know. First thing is a spoiler warning. There are going to be spoilers for Seasons 1, 2, and 3 of Camp Cretaceous. Now, there's one other thing about spoilers I want to mention. I wrote a post about this on my channel, but in case you missed it, here it is. To avoid spoiling you guys outside this video, I will not be uploading any new Camp Cretaceous related content for 2 weeks, starting from the premiere date of Season 3. That way you guys have time to watch it. After that, from June 5th onwards, anything goes. And finally, this review will be audio only, just like my reviews of Seasons 1 and 2. And just like before, there will be timestamps in the video description that correspond with specific topics. So now that I've got that out of the way, let's get started with my review of Season 3 of Camp Cretaceous. The first topic I'll discuss is the overall plot progression. Having 10 episodes this season certainly gives the show more time to tell the story, whether they take it slow or just go all out. In this case, they went all out. Nothing was dragged on for too long, and this leads me to my next point about why Season 3 was so good. The pacing. I think the pacing of Season 3 is the biggest thing it has going for it. There wasn't any unnecessary filler to interrupt the increasingly tense story. More on the tense part shortly. Sure, the characters may have taken short breaks from the action near the beginning, like when they were partying on the boat or chilling in the penthouse, but the story was always building up to something bigger as it progressed. In other words, every episode had something important to the plot in it, and there were big events that connected a lot of things. Most notably, the events near the end of Season 3 coincided with the events in the beginning of Fallen Kingdom. Next time I watch Fallen Kingdom, I'm probably going to be like, hey, Darius and the campers are just around the corner from all this chaos. Now I'm going to discuss the themes presented in Season 3. Something that Camp Cretaceous has done a consistent job with is focusing on a different theme each season while still keeping it fresh and exciting. Season 1 focused on action, Season 2 focused on adventure, and Season 3 focused on horror/thriller. And as I mentioned earlier, there weren't really any breaks in the pacing of the story, so it was constantly thrilling and exciting throughout the whole season. And there were so many tense moments that got my heart pumping fast, like the Scorpius Rex attacking the fortress, Blue fighting the Scorpius Rexes in Jurassic Park, and even when Rexy was chasing the campers in the storm. And there were even some jump scares here and there that threw me off, like the Monolophosaurus in the vents. So yeah, Season 3 was scary and thrilling. Those were the themes, but what made the story scary and thrilling? Violence, that's what. That's right, violence. Unlike the first 2 seasons, Season 3 of Camp Cretaceous has a higher TV rating. I think it's PG or something like that, depends on your country. I remember thinking back from my Season 3 trailer review that I didn't think Season 3 was going to play it safe. And guess what? They sure as hell didn't. Season 3 was going to be built on horror/thriller, and the violence in this season was what these themes were based on. Compared to the violence seen in previous seasons, this season raised the bar, for a DreamWorks cartoon animation that is. Oddly enough, it wasn't even the human deaths that were scary. It was the deaths of the dinosaurs that did it. There was one scene in particular that really shocked me. It was when the campers were running away from the Scorpius Rex, whichever time that was, and it was pouncing on a bunch of fleeing herbivores and killing them one at a time. During all this, there's a part where it jumps on a Parasaurolophus and it bit down on its throat and basically pulled it out. Now obviously we didn't see any blood and guts, but we didn't have to. We got the idea. Overall, Season 3 did exactly what it set out to do. What is it that makes a Jurassic World story a Jurassic World story? Dinosaurs. Just like every season that came before it, Season 3 had a wide variety of dinosaurs, some new ones and some familiar faces. So for this section, I'll start off by talking about the new dinosaurs featured in Season 3, and then talk about some returning ones afterwards. I'll start with the dinosaur we saw previewed in the Season 3 trailer, the Monolophosaurus. What was unique about this dinosaur is that Darius said they're loners and they keep to themselves, but then there was another, and then a whole swarm of them, and they were really cool. They climbed down the elevator shafts, through the vents, and overall gave us some fun scenes. Next, I have a very special dinosaur to talk about, the Ouranosaurus. Why is it so special? Because Season 3 marks the first time these dinosaurs appear, not only in Camp Cretaceous, but the entire story canon in general. What also made these dinosaurs so unique is that they were unlike any other herbivore we've seen. They were aggressive, relentless, and annoying, just like the Canadian geese in my own backyard. They swam out to sea to chase the boat, and they did all this without provocation. Now afterwards, Darius suspected that the reason the Ouranосauruses acted so aggressively was because the island's ecosystem was being thrown out of whack by something. That something would be the Scorpius Rex. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. If you remember from the Season 3 trailer, the Scorpius Rex was built up to be the biggest threat the campers have ever faced, and in so many ways, it was. This thing went on an absolute killing spree. I didn't actually count how many dinosaurs it killed, I might do that later, but it killed a lot of them, and as I mentioned in the theme section, brought sheer brutality this season. The Scorpius Rex is the reason why Camp Cretaceous had its rating changed. There are quite a few features of the Scorpius Rex that made it different from the other hybrids we've seen in the movies. One of the Scorpius Rex's abilities is that it can sense heat signatures in their prey, and we see that through various shots of its point of view, and when I saw those, I instantly thought of the Predator from the movie Predator. Speaking of which, the Scorpius Rex is one ugly mother... Well, you get the idea. But yeah, it was definitely a weird-looking creature, and I don't necessarily mean that in the bad way, because it's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be this horrible, ugly abomination of mad science. And you know what else? The Scorpius Rex reminds me of something I saw in a video game, like a monster or something, but I can't remember where I remember it from. Maybe you guys can throw me some ideas and jog my memory. Anyway, the second feature of the Scorpius Rex can be found in how it moves. Now I could be wrong, but I thought that the Scorpius Rex moved a lot like both a frog and a monkey, because there's a lot of shots when the Scorpius Rex is pouncing on dinosaurs, and it kind of reminded me of how a frog jumps, quick hops here and there. And when the Scorpius Rex would climb trees, the way it moved through the trees and grabbed onto branches kind of reminded me of a monkey. I know that's weird. If I had to choose between those two animals, I'd say it's more frog-like, especially because of its third feature, the ability to reproduce. In an unexpected twist, there turned out to be 2 Scorpius Rexes on the island. Darius suggested that the Scorpius Rex could reproduce asexually, and if you don't know what that means, it basically means that it doesn't need a partner to produce offspring. It does it all on its own. Now with that in mind, could there be more out there? I don't think so. Why? Because even if there were more, Isla Nublar was destroyed by the volcano in Fallen Kingdom, so anything still on the island would die anyway. And Colin Trevorrow has confirmed that there will not be any more hybrids in the movies after Fallen Kingdom. I thought it was really cool with its venomous quills. That was really interesting. But the last feature I want to talk about is its roar. It sounded like something straight out of a horror movie. Again, building on the horror theme. Its roar was long, loud, and screeching. It sounded like a monster, which was awesome. Overall, I thought the Scorpius Rex was a unique addition to the franchise. It may not have been as badass as the Indominus Rex or the Indoraptor, but at the same time, it wasn't just a carbon copy of either of those hybrids. It was its own hybrid, a force to be reckoned with nonetheless. Now the Dimorphodons. Yeah, I know these don't technically count as dinosaurs, but they're still newcomers to Camp Cretaceous all the same. Now there weren't a lot of scenes with the Dimorphodons. In fact, I think there was only the one scene with the gliders that was already previewed before Season 3 even came out. But for what it's worth, we still got a nice little chase scene with these annoying little pests. And I mean it, they're annoying. Watch someone play The Lost World for the PlayStation. Or if you're really daring, play it yourself. You'll see what I mean. Now I'm going to move on to an old favorite. Blue. Now, we've already seen Blue in previous seasons, but only in a few very brief appearances. Here, they finally did something big with her, so that's why I'm including her in this section. Blue had all kinds of cool scenes, like when she was fighting the Scorpius Rex, but there are 2 things I liked best about Blue this season. The first thing is that we got to learn more about how she survived on her own, like when she was eating the Compy and nesting in the ruins of Jurassic Park. The second thing is that the story built on Blue's relationship with humans a bit more. Remember, Darius, Kenji, and Yasmina saved her when she was trapped under the overturned vehicle. And then when Darius reached out his hand like Owen did in Jurassic World, Blue recognized this behavior from her time with Owen. Afterwards, she didn't see Darius as the enemy. So yeah, I'm really happy that Camp Cretaceous finally used Blue in a big way. So now that I've gone over the new dinosaurs this season, I'm going to go over a couple of the dinosaurs we've already seen before that really stood out for me. I'll start off with none other than the icon of the franchise, the T-Rex. I loved the scenes she was in this season, not just because she's the T-Rex, but also because they were visually appealing and very artistic as well. Allow me to explain. During her chase scenes in the jungle, the sky was dark, and with the rain and lightning, you can make out her dark shape in the dark. Even when the lightning flashed, she looked like a shadow. And all these things made her scenes very intense, and even scary. I got strong Jurassic Park vibes from the first part of her scenes, and even though the T-Rex wasn't in this season for very long, she still played a huge part in the story, because if you remember, her scenes coincide with the opening scene of Fallen Kingdom. Because right after she gives up chasing the campers, she goes after Jack and the helicopter, just like we saw in Fallen Kingdom. It was a great way to make the story come together more. She didn't need to take center stage this season, and that's okay. To me, it's quality over quantity. And speaking of which, there was another dinosaur that gave us a great quality scene, the Baryonyx. How they made their appearance was part of the reason why their scene was so good. I had a feeling that the mercenary wasn't actually sneaking up on the campers like he thought he was. Because when I saw the light patterns through his goggles, for some reason I thought he was approaching some Parasaurolophuses because of their glowing colors. But no, it turned out to be the Baryonyxes from Season 2. He had no clue what was coming, and they killed him right on the spot. And I'm not gonna lie, I laughed at this part, because I didn't know it was coming either. It was definitely a nice surprise to see the Baryonyxes again, and right away they did what they do best. This may have been their only scene this season, but like I said earlier, quality over quantity. Next, I want to quickly talk about the Brachiosaurus. Kinda like the Baryonyx, it didn't have a lot of screen time, but what it had really warmed my heart. You know what I'm talking about. The baby Brachiosaurus reuniting with its parent. This is one of the most heartwarming moments in the entire series. But there is one other heartwarming scene this season, and I'm going to talk about that next. Of course, I'm talking about Bumpy. I wasn't sure what we were going to see with Bumpy this season, but what we got was more than I imagined. And it was interesting how the story went through with this, because right when the season started, Bumpy was seen on the shore as the campers were setting sail. And right away, my heart sank. It was happening already, and there wasn't even a goodbye scene, at least in the beginning anyway. Thankfully, Bumpy was in a lot more scenes than I thought, and there were enough of them to effectively incorporate her into the story, whether it was for comical purposes like when she was on the boat, or for action purposes like the fight with the Scorpius Rex. Speaking of which, that was one thing I felt very uneasy about. Even before Season 3 premiered, Bumpy's fate was always on my mind. There are multiple videos on my channel talking about this in one way or another, and with Season 3 focusing on horror and thriller, the Scorpius Rex was being foreshadowed as this huge threat. So I thought for sure that someone was going to be a victim, just to really hammer in how vicious the Scorpius Rex was. Would Bumpy be that victim? Well, thank goodness she wasn't. When Ben let her go free to join the Ankylosaurus herd, he knew that it was time for Bumpy to be with her own kind, and he accepted that. He knew they would protect her, and that she'd be okay. Now I have a very special Bumpy video for when my spoiler deadline passes. There's a lot more I want to say, but I'll save it for another time. But I will say this. This makes me very happy, even though my eyes got watery and I almost cried. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. Even if you guys had a similar reaction as mine, I'm still happy. Bumpy's story came to a satisfying close, and as sad as it was to see her go, she's safe now, and I hope it stays that way and she makes it off the island in Fallen Kingdom. We'll see. Now I'm going to talk about character development. With a total of 10 episodes this season, there were a lot more opportunities for character development, and once again, Season 3 delivered. So for this part, I'll go over each of the main characters in no particular order and talk about their development throughout Season 3. I'll start off with Darius. I'm just going to say it right now. He is one of the best developed characters this season. Yep, in my opinion, he's one of the best, and that's because of two reasons. The first reason is that Season 3 sort of kept his love for dinosaurs into the story, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Even though Season 3 was filled with horror and thrills, it still took the time to show the dinosaurs as animals and not monsters. And we got to see Darius experience that wonder again. A perfect example of this is when Darius was feeding the Gallimimus, and even his interactions with Blue. Now I know I talked a bit about this earlier about Blue, but he's the only other person besides Owen who was able to calm Blue down by reaching out his hand. And after everything that happened between Darius and Blue, especially during the Scorpius Rex fight at the Visitor Center, I feel that a bond was starting to form between them. Not quite the same as what Owen has with Blue, but at the very least, Blue doesn't see Darius as an enemy. Darius personified that sense of wonder once again. The other reason why Darius was so well developed this season was because Season 3 showed more of his friendship. Even though Darius is a kid who loves dinosaurs, he's more than that. He's a loving and loyal friend. Throughout the entire season, Darius was always being a good friend to everyone, even more than what we've seen before. Whether he was checking up on Ben to see how he was feeling, or assuring Kenji that he doesn't need fancy things to be important to others, Darius is a genuine and good friend. He legit cares. He's the kind of friend that tries his best to make you happy if you're ever feeling sad. He's the kind of friend that has your back. And he's the kind of friend that tries to stay positive and find a solution to a problem, even when everything else seems hopeless. He doesn't give up on others or himself. There are a couple of other scenes with Darius I really liked. One was when he was comforting Ben when Bumpy rediscovered her herd. It just goes to show how good a friend Darius is. Another one I liked is at the very end, when he looks back at Isla Nublar and goes, click. At the end of it all, Darius was a well-balanced character this season when it comes to his love for dinosaurs and the love for his friends. Now I'm going to move on to my favorite character, Ben. Now already Ben's grown a lot throughout the show. The first 2 seasons were more so about Ben finding his courage and changing as a person. Now if you remember from my Season 2 review, I hoped that for Season 3, Ben would not lose his personality and only be used as a guy for action scenes. And I got my wish. Ben's character was very well balanced this season. His bold and reckless attitude was toned down a lot, but he still kept enough of it to remind us that he's not the same anxious kid we saw back in Season 1. This is exactly what I wanted to see with Ben, and Camp Cretaceous once again delivered. There's just one thing about Ben this season I thought was strange. He wanted to stay behind on Isla Nublar, not just for Bumpy's sake, but for his own sake too. Now, I get where he's coming from to a certain degree. Being on Isla Nublar changed him into someone he's now proud of, and he can be that person on Isla Nublar. He doesn't want to lose that new sense of self, but I'm wondering, is Ben's home life really that bad that he wants to stay behind? Maybe this is just a plot hole, or maybe it's something that'll be addressed later, I don't know. But as far as Ben goes, I'm very happy with what they've done with his character this season. He had a good balance and had his fair share of memorable moments, my favorite being when he was riding with Bumpy and her herd to rescue Brooklyn. Speaking of which, that's the next character I'll be talking about. Now, unfortunately, Brooklyn didn't get as much development as the other characters did this season. But that's not to say she didn't get any development at all. Don't get me wrong, having more development time certainly helps, but quality plays just as big a part, if not a bigger part. I think what I like best about Brooklyn this season is that we got to learn a bit more about her past, like when she said she had to take some kind of medical training for one of her past trips, and that came in handy for when Sammy was poisoned. I also liked how she had a lot more in common with Yasmina than she realized. Even though Brooklyn's this super popular vlogger, that doesn't mean her life's always been easy. She never really had a normal childhood. Not really any close friends to bond with either. But now that's all changed. Now that we know a bit more about where she came from, and look at where she is now, she has come a long way as a character. And that's what I was hoping for going into this season. I also want to briefly mention a very funny moment she had. Remember when Dr. Wu and the mercenary kidnapped her, she was banging an umbrella on those pipes to be annoying? That was funny. But yeah, Brooklyn's definitely come a long way, and hopefully it continues. Moving on, we have Yasmina, who arguably went through the most development this season. The biggest thing I got from Yasmina this season came from her friendship with Sammy. I'll talk about this next part in more detail later, but I thought it was weird that Yasmina never really saw Sammy as a friend. At least that's what she said anyway. I knew that wasn't true, so at first I didn't really get why she said it. But the more I think about it, I understand that she was just afraid. Afraid to get close to people because she felt she'd get hurt at some point. But honestly, the risk is well worth the rewards because she found a friend in all the campers, especially Sammy. An entire episode was dedicated to their friendship when we saw all those flashbacks of their past adventures, all at the same time while Yasmina was risking her life running through the dark jungle to get the antidote for Sammy. And she was a real badass during all that too. When she fell into the river after that long jump, she pulled herself up on the vine and kept on going. Just like with Brooklyn's character arc, think back to where Yasmina was in the beginning as a person, and look at her now. In my opinion, one of the best. And then we have Sammy. Last season, she didn't get a lot of character development compared to the others, but this season more than made up for that. We got to revisit why Sammy went to Isla Nublar in the first place, to spy for Manticore. She was determined to find some answers, and even though we still don't have all the answers, Sammy was still the one at the forefront of discovering the answers we did find. The thing I like best about Sammy is that she's always positive and cheerful, and genuinely cares for the well-being of her friends and family. Much like Darius, Sammy is a good friend. If you remember back in the first season, she sometimes came off as creepy happy to some of the other campers, like Yasmina for instance. But this season, she wasn't. I noticed she was really close with Kenji this season. They spent a lot of time together. Now, I'm not expecting any romance in this situation. With that said, it's good to see different characters spending time with each other. With all the things that happened to Sammy this season, like solving the mystery of E750 and fighting for her life when she was poisoned, she was another well-developed character this season. Much more than before. Finally, we come to Kenji. This is an interesting case because I'm on a metaphorical roller coaster with him. By the end of the first season, I didn't like him or hate him, but I was able to at least tolerate him. By the end of season 2, he was still cocky, but in a goofy and lighthearted way, so he was more likable at that time. In season 3, I feel that whatever development Kenji did have got thrown out the window, because he was back to being all cocky and not in the goofy lighthearted way from before. It was back to bragging about how cool he was, how rich he was, how cool he was because of how rich he was, and all the fancy expensive stuff he's got. And yeah, he did end up talking to Darius about it afterwards, who talked some sense into him. But I thought that Kenji would have known by now that you don't need fancy stuff to impress people. Now, I'm not saying that Kenji was useless or anything like that, because he did have some good moments here and there, like when he was comforting Sammy when she was sick, or when he was imitating the Brachiosaurus call to help the baby Brachiosaurus. That was really smart. And yes, I actually thought his jump scare prank on the boat was funny. So right now, it seems like we're going backwards with Kenji, and now he doesn't even seem to like the campers anymore, at least Darius anyway. But hopefully in the future, he'll get back on track, right after he gets over his Sasuke Uchiha phase. So now we come to the part where I talk about the things I did not like this season. What didn't I like? What kind of things could have been done differently that would make things better? Well, thankfully, there was hardly anything I disliked about this season that affected my overall experience, but there were a few red flags along the way, and I'll go over each of them, starting with the least concerning to the most concerning. The first thing I didn't like was the apparent time skip as soon as the season started. As soon as the first episode started, the campers were already on their raft. I thought maybe they'd dedicate just one episode to actually building the raft, and it's not like they built it right when season 2 ended either, because Yasmina makes a comment about how it took them weeks to get enough fabric to use for the sail. So a few more weeks have already gone by since the end of season 2. What happened during all that time? Now, there is a positive side to this. This one's not a huge problem for me because the characters do acknowledge their failed escape attempts during that time in the scene with the chalkboard. From a storytelling standpoint, this was very smart because the show got the point across quickly and effectively without actually having to show every attempt. Think about this. Would you want the show to drag on for 2 or 3 episodes just to watch them fail every time when the same conclusion can be told in just 1 episode? The second thing I didn't like was that I felt there were certain things that were brought up again that I thought were already resolved in previous episodes. As I mentioned earlier, Yasmina told Sammy that they aren't friends and they never were, just like in season 1. I thought they resolved that already. Also, the campers said they'd never see each other again after being rescued, just like in season 1. I thought they resolved that already. And in the first episode of the season, There was a lot of tension between Brooklyn and Yasmina, but why though? I thought they resolved all that. This issue's kind of in the middle for me, because even though it was odd to see these things brought up again, they did get resolved pretty quickly, so hopefully they're resolved for good this time. Finally, the third thing I didn't like, the thing that irritated me the most, was Kenji. I already talked about my gripes with him earlier in the character development section, but like I said, whatever character development he got was thrown out the window, and I was really hoping the show would explore the subplot about Kenji's relationship with his dad, or the lack thereof rather, so that maybe we can learn more about Kenji and build on him more. But we didn't really get that. Instead, I just feel like we went backwards with Kenji. He was just annoying and cocky a lot of the time. Again, not in the funny way. But his biggest offense was in the very first episode of the season. Bumpy's running to the shore as the campers are setting sail, and right away, I'm still trying to drink it in that the campers have already left without saying goodbye to Bumpy. And then Kenji had to go and ruin the moment. Like, dude, would you please shut the hell up? Now I want to quickly talk about the future of Camp Cretaceous. There's still lots more to talk about in terms of plot, but I want to save those topics for different videos, but I'll go over a few key points here and there. Even though the campers left Isla Nublar on the boat, the ending is still open, because in the final shot, you see the boat's door and hear a dinosaur making noises, implying that something else left the island with the campers on the boat. I'm under the impression that this stowaway is probably just a compy or two, and if that's the case, then this is another homage to the Jurassic Park novel, because if you remember from the novel, there were sightings of compies on the mainland both before and after the disaster of Jurassic Park, and on top of that, velociraptors snuck aboard the boat headed for the mainland, but they were killed before it docked. So Camp Cretaceous kind of combined these two references into one. So with this revelation, there could potentially be a fourth season. Now, just before Season 2 premiered, Colin Trevorrow said in an interview, quote, "It's important to me, out of respect for the writers who are continuing to expand and create, to recognize Camp Cretaceous as clearly its own story and its own show. But this season, and if we're granted further opportunities to tell the story that we have in Season 3, we'll keep weaving into the larger story and really inform some things, even in Dominion, that will connect to discoveries made that I'm really excited about." End quote. So these opportunities that Trevorrow talked about could come in the form of a fourth season, perhaps. Now, if there is going to be a fourth season, what could it be about? I honestly don't know yet. I mean, the campers already left Camp Cretaceous, so there's no reason to go back, but maybe it'll focus on the aftermath of everything that's happened, like the campers exposing Dr. Wu's research. And what about Manticore? Was it them that sent another drone to the island that was destroyed by the Scorpius Rex? Those things would be cool to see, but then what about the dinosaurs? They're still on Isla Nublar, and they don't get to the mainland until the end of Fallen Kingdom, which takes place years later. It wouldn't be much of a Jurassic World story without dinosaurs in it. Whatever happens, I'm sure they'll come up with something great. So to wrap up this review of Season 3, I'm going to summarize my overall thoughts. I thought it was amazing. The plot was well written and made lots of important connections to other story elements within the show, and even within the movies. Season 3 also had loads of thrills and always kept me on the edge of my seat, eagerly waiting to see what happens next. There were plenty of nods and tributes to Jurassic Park, and they were all well integrated into the story. And lastly, this season had plenty of heart. It was an emotional season, and there were many moments that pulled on my heartstrings, and I absolutely loved it. All these elements came together to make what I think is the best season yet. It's definitely worth watching again, I promise. On that note, this concludes my review of Season 3 of Camp Cretaceous. What are your thoughts on Season 3? Did you like it as much as I did? What were your favorite parts? Talk about it in the comments. Thank you for listening. If you want to see more Jurassic content, check out my channel. And if you want to keep seeing more Jurassic content, subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.